The Battle of Jericho is one of the most famous in the Bible. It's easy to see why. It's a great story, with the children of Israel carrying the ark around the city blowing trumpets, until on the seventh day the city's walls fall and they rush into victory. It's also one of the Bible's most infamous stories because of what happened next. The army of Israel massacred everyone, women, children, even animals, an incredible bloodbath, all on the orders of God. It's appalling. How could a loving God possibly want that? The answer, according to the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, has its roots earlier in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, the flood of Noah, the Tower of Babel, and ultimately in the spiritual role being played by the children of Israel. The Garden of Eden, according to Swedenborg, represents the Lord's first and greatest church, with prehistoric people living in innocence, motivated by a pure love of the Lord. We could call this a church of the heart, centered on love. Swedenborg says this church existed in Canaan, and thus every aspect of the land there was associated with some aspect of loving the Lord. Eventually, however, people wanted to live and think from themselves instead of from the Lord. So they rejected the Lord, and with no real way to resist, plunged into horrible evil. So the Lord stripped them of every true thing they knew, represented by the flood, and started a second church with a few good people represented by Noah. The people of this church had great knowledge of the Lord and could see the spiritual meaning in every aspect of the natural world. We could call it a church of the mind, centered on thoughts and ideas. But eventually they, too, wanted to follow themselves instead of following God, and turned to worshiping idols and making sacrifices, including human sacrifice. So God stripped them of their knowledge too, represented by the Tower of Babel, and started a third church with Abraham and his descendants. This third church was not a church of the heart. People had made themselves thoroughly selfish. It was not a church of the mind. People didn't even know what it meant to be loving and kind. It was a church of the body, a church based on obedience, on performing the right duties and rituals on the outside, even if people were cruel and heartless on the inside. That church, among the children of Israel, had its purposes. The Lord used it to get the Bible written, with the stories of Israel filled with spiritual meaning. He used it to preserve the idea that there was one God and one God only, and he used it to prepare for the time when he could enter natural life as Jesus. But the people themselves were hard and loveless. With that background, let's look at Jericho. Swedenborg says that in ideal circumstances, Jericho, which is near the Jordan River at the edge of the Holy Land, represents learning about things that are loving and true, something we do as we start moving toward heaven. But in this story, the people of the city worship idols, so the meaning is flipped. Instead of ideas about heaven, Jericho represents a system of evil, hateful ideas. Its walls represent the basic falsities that defend the system, and the people of the city represent the deep-seated desire to use what we know to actually attack the Lord and ideas about the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant represents true ideas directly from the Lord's expression of all that is good. The priests sounding trumpets represent us teaching and learning from that truth that comes from the Lord. The shout of the people represents confirmation, belief that these things are true. In concert, those ideas flowing from the Lord through us have the power to destroy the false ideas protecting Jericho. And once those walls are down, we need to find in our own minds the ideas that urge us to attack the Lord and wash them away. They need to be destroyed if we are to enter the life of heaven. So we can see how that natural battle among men on earth is actually symbolic, teaching us about a battle we all face as we struggle toward heaven. But it still leaves a question. Isn't there any other way the Lord could have taught us this? Couldn't he have done it without having children slaughtered? The answer to that is yes. The Lord never wishes anything bad on anyone, and would love to teach us everything good directly. But the Lord also lets us be free, and in their freedom the children of Israel were harsh, bloodthirsty, genocidal people, as were all the tribes they battled. Swedenborg tells us that the people of Israel would have slaughtered their enemies anyway, just as their enemies would have slaughtered them. What the Lord did was see to it that the natural battles reflected spiritual battles, so the people would later be able to read the Bible and learn better, more loving ways to be. The Lord is still engaged in this process today. We all make bad choices, but the Lord is constantly working to use those choices to teach us good things. So the fact that there are lessons to be learned from the Battle of Jericho doesn't make the slaughter a good thing. The trick for us is to abhor the slaughter while embracing the lessons it can teach us. That's not easy. Some of the stories in the Bible are pretty violent, but it helps the Bible make a lot more sense.